The Vex arrived not with fire, but with silence. There was no grand orbital bombardment. No cities turned to glass and ash in a spectacle of alien wrath. Their invasion was a quiet suffocation, a slow, methodical erasure. They descended from ships that were matte black voids against the stars, ships that absorbed light and sound, and they deployed a nanite mist that blanketed the globe. It was an elegant, almost merciful weapon. The mist didn't kill, it edited. It seeped into servers and books, into paintings and film reels, into the very neural pathways of human memory, and it began to delete. History dissolved. Shakespeare became garbled nonsense. The Declaration of Independence read like a warranty for a Vex atmospheric processor. The faces of loved ones in old photographs blurred, the names attached to them fading from the mind like morning fog. Within a single generation, Earth was renamed Sector 734 and its inhabitants, once the proud, chaotic architects of their own destiny, became a compliant, placid workforce for the Vex unification. Humanity hadn't been conquered. It had been redacted. The Vex's first mistake wasn't underestimating humanity's capacity for violence, but their talent for ghosts. They believed that if you erased the record, you erased the soul. They were wrong. Doctor Elara Vance was a ghost keeper, though she held the official title of Junior Archivist, Grade 3 at the Grand Archive of Subsumed Cultures on Neo-Alexandria. The sprawling, sterile city the Vex had built over the ruins of what was once called London. Her job was to sift through the digital detritus of conquered civilizations, the Groll, the Signian Drift, a dozen others, and catalog their sanitized histories for the Vex's great library. It was a task of immense precision and profound emptiness. She spent her days translating epic poems that had been stripped of passion, analyzing star charts of empires that no longer had names, and documenting the biology of creatures whose worlds were now Vex-forged planets. And every night, in the quiet hum of her sterile living pod, she would risk cognitive deletion, the Vex euphemism for a mind wipe to access the ghosts. They were fragments, corrupted files buried deep in the archive's substrata. Anomalies the Vex's nanite editors had missed. A line of defiant poetry from a Groll warrior queen, a 3-second clip of a Signian child laughing, and her most precious, dangerous secret, a single, intact piece of music from old Earth. It was a song called Clair de Lune, a cascade of piano notes so filled with a fragile, heartbreaking beauty that it felt like a weapon. To the Vex, whose language was pure mathematics and whose art was the cold symmetry of a perfect equation, such a thing was not just meaningless, it was a contagion, a chaotic sequence of illogical tones that could infect a mind with the disease of emotion. Her superior was Curator Vorlag, a Vex of imposing stature, its tall, slender frame always draped in robes the color of static. Vorlag did not walk, it glided, its movements economical and precise. It communicated not through a mouth, the Vex had no such crude orifices, but through a synthesized voice, a monotone whisper that seemed to emanate from the air itself. Archivist Vance, the voice would hum, its pitch unwavering whether it was assigning a new cataloging task or announcing the cognitive deletion of a colleague who had shown a flicker of unauthorized nostalgia. Your efficiency has increased by 0.7% this cycle. Commendable. The unification values order. To Vorlag, humanity was a fascinating, flawed project. It saw them as gifted children who had been saved from their own self-destructive passions, their chaotic art, their irrational loves and illogical wars. The erasure of their past was not an act of cruelty, but of kindness. It was a form of quarantine, protecting the galactic community from the unpredictable virus of the human heart. The day everything changed began like any other. Ilara was assigned a new datasphere recovered from a derelict human colony ship, the Odyssey, which had been found drifting in the Kuiper Belt. It was supposed to be a standard subsumption log, the ship's schematics, its cargo manifests, its crew roster, and then flag the entire archive for redaction. As her fingers danced over the holographic interface, translating the raw data into the ordered script of the Vex archive, she found an anomaly. It was a nested file, locked behind an encryption that wasn't human or Vex. It was a complex, organic cipher that seemed to learn and adapt as she tried to breach it. For 3 days, she worked, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She bypassed the archive's monitoring systems by routing the process through a series of ghost servers she had built over years, a digital back alley invisible to the Vex's omnipresent gaze. Finally, on the third night, the lock broke. It didn't open. It shattered. And what poured out was not data, but a memory. She was no longer in her sterile archival pod. She was standing in a field of tall, green grass under a sky of impossible blue. A warm wind carried the scent of soil and something sweet, like flowers. A man with lines of laughter etched around his eyes was teaching a small girl how to fly a kite, a diamond of red fabric dancing against the clouds. You have to let the string out slowly. Little star. The man's voice echoed, warm and real. You can't force it. You have to feel the wind. Work with it. The girl, her face a constellation of freckles, laughed, a sound like pure, unedited joy. It was a memory of a grandfather and his granddaughter. It was mundane, it was perfect, and it was impossible. The nanite mist should have scoured this from existence. Tucked into the memory's metadata was a single word, sanctuary. A cold dread, sharp and clarifying, washed over her. This wasn't just a missed file. This was a message. The Odyssey hadn't been a simple colony ship. It was a lifeboat, an ark. It was sent not to colonize a new world, but to preserve the old one, carrying a cargo of unredacted memories, a seed bank for the human soul. Before she could process the implications, an alert chimed softly in her pod, a priority message from Curator Vorlag. Archivist Vance, the synthesized voice whispered, carrying a new and terrifying undertone. A data anomaly has been flagged in your sector, originating from the Odyssey sphere. Please remain at your terminal. A compliance unit is on its way to assist you. Assist. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. There was no assistance. There was only the quiet, sterile hum of the cognitive deletion machine. Panic, cold and electric, seized her. She had seconds. Her mind raced, sifting through the years of ghost files, of hidden back doors and smuggled information. She had a contact, a name she had never dared to use, a smuggler who operated in the Undercity, the warren of old tunnels and maintenance shafts beneath Neo-Alexandria's polished facade. Kalen, a man who dealt in the forbidden unredacted books, pre-unification artifacts, real sugar. He was a rogue variable in the Vex's perfect equation, a dealer in the contraband of memory. She had once traded him a schematic of Vex patrol routes for a small vial of real perfume that smelled of rain and jasmine, a scent that brought a ghost of a memory of her own mother to her mind. It was a desperate, foolish hope, but it was the only one she had. She grabbed the Odyssey datasphere, shoving it into a shielded pouch, wiping her terminal. She initiated a cascade failure in her sector's power grid, a trick she'd learned from a Grohl engineer's redacted logbook. The lights flickered and died, plunging the sector into an emergency-lit twilight. Alarms, strangely musical and serene in the Vex fashion, began to chime. In the ensuing chaos, she slipped out of her workstation and melted into the maintenance corridors, her archivist's uniform a stark white against the grime and shadows. She ran, not with the grace of a soldier, but with the frantic desperation of a librarian who had just read a forbidden book and knew, with absolute certainty, that the story was true. The Undercity was a different world. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, recycled water, and the unidentifiable scent of thousands of people living in defiance of sterile perfection. Here, the Vex's control was less absolute. Their surveillance drones rarely patrolled the narrow, dripping tunnels, deeming the chaotic ecosystem of smugglers, dissenters, and outcasts statistically irrelevant. Elara found Kalen in a makeshift bar called The Glitch, a cavern lit by the flickering glow of repurposed Vex tech. He was leaning against a rusted bulkhead, a cynical smirk playing on his lips as he watched a game of chance played with pre-unification poker chips. He was sharp angles and restless energy, his eyes holding the weary intelligence of someone who had survived by always knowing the odds. "An archivist," he said, his voice a low rasp, not even bothering to look up as she approached. "A long way from your clean, quiet world of lies." "I need passage," she said, her voice tight, placing the vial of jasmine perfume on the table beside him. "Off-world. Now." He finally looked at her, his gaze lingering on the shielded pouch at her hip. "That's not just a day pass you're carrying. That's a death sentence." "What's in it? Hope," she breathed, the word feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. "And a place. Sanctuary." Kalen's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of something she couldn't read. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the cavern, noting the exits, the shadows, the faces. "Sanctuary," he repeated, the word a ghost on his own lips. "The old stories. The ghost fleet. I thought it was just a fairy tale to keep the hopeless from walking into a deletion chamber." "It's real," she insisted. "The Odyssey data proves it. But the Vex know. They're coming." He picked up the perfume, held it to his nose for a brief moment, a fleeting expression of some old memory crossing his face. "The stories say the ghost fleet is hidden in the Serpent's Maw." He mused, naming a notoriously treacherous asteroid field that even Vex patrols avoided. "No one's made it through there in a generation. The gravitational tides will tear a ship apart." "You can," she said, a statement of faith she didn't know she possessed. "I've seen your ship's specs in the Port Authority logs. The Stray Dog. It's a junk hauler, but its inertial dampeners are illegally modified. They're military grade." Kalen let out a short, harsh laugh. "You archivists, you see everything. Fine. But this isn't for a vial of perfume. I get a full share of whatever this hope is worth." "Agreed," she said without hesitation. Their escape from Neo-Alexandria was a blur of forged clearance codes, frantic sprints through darkened service tunnels, and a gut-wrenching vertical ascent in a cargo lift that rattled like it was coming apart. Kalen's ship, the Stray Dog, was exactly as she'd imagined, a cramped, ugly vessel that smelled of ozone and spilled engine coolant, its every surface dented and patched. But as Kalen strapped himself into the pilot's chair, his hands moving over the controls with an intuitive grace, she felt the first real flicker of something other than fear. The ship lifted from its hidden berth, a shadow detaching from other shadows, and ascended into the night sky, a sky filled with the silent, gliding forms of Vex patrol craft. An alarm blared on the console. "They've locked onto our energy signature," Kalen grunted, his knuckles white as he pushed the throttle forward. "Hold on. This is where we prove the fairy tales are real." The stray dog leaped forward, a surge of impossible acceleration pinning Ilara to her seat. Behind them, Neo Alexandria shrank to a perfect grid of cold, white light. Ahead, the blackness of space was studded with the glittering, treacherous diamonds of the Serpent's Maw. As they plunged into the asteroid field, 3 Vex interceptors, sleek and deadly as obsidian shards, appeared in their wake, their weapon ports glowing with malevolent energy. The hunt had begun. The Serpent's Maw was not an asteroid field. It was a cosmic graveyard, a maelstrom of shattered planets and dead comets caught in the complex gravitational dance of a dozen rogue planetoids. Kalen threw the stray dog into it with the suicidal confidence of a man who had nothing to lose. The ship bucked and groaned, metal screaming in protest as he weaved through spinning mountains of nickel iron and ice. Proximity alerts shrieked a constant, frantic chorus. On the tactical display, the 3 Vex interceptors followed, their movements a stark contrast to Kalen's barely controlled chaos. They flew in perfect, synchronized formation, their plasma cannons firing not in a panicked spray, but in precise, calculated bursts timed to intersect with Kalen's predicted trajectory. They were hunting a rogue data point, and their logic was flawless. "They're anticipating your evasion patterns," Ilara said, her voice strained as she held onto her console, her knuckles white. "Their targeting algorithm is predictive, based on standard small craft evasive maneuvers." Kalen grunted, his face illuminated by the red glow of a collision warning. "Good to know. Any other helpful Vex trivia you've got tucked away in that big brain of yours?" His sarcasm was a thin shield over a core of intense focus. "Their logic is their weakness," she shot back, her mind, trained in the Vex's own methods, beginning to see a pattern. "They expect you to preserve the vessel. They'll calculate the path of least damage. Do the opposite." Kalen's eyes flickered towards her, a glimmer of grudging respect in their depths. "You want me to fly us closer to the fire. I want you to fly like a madman," she clarified. "Fly like you don't care if we live or die." A slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. "Now you're speaking my language, archivist." He yanked the control stick, sending the stray dog into a gut-wrenching spin, diving directly toward a massive, tumbling asteroid the size of a small city. The Vex ships adjusted their course, their flawless logic concluding he would skirt the asteroid's edge. Instead, Kalen flew straight into a deep, narrow canyon scarring its surface. The ship's shields scraped against the canyon walls, showering the cockpit in a cascade of golden sparks. For a terrifying minute, they were blind, flying through a tunnel of rock and shadow, the ship's sensors screaming about imminent structural collapse. Then, they burst out the other side, the black of space and the glitter of the maw reappearing. On the tactical display, The 3 Vex interceptors were gone. "What happened?" Alara gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Big rock. Unstable magnetic core," Kalen said, his voice deceptively casual as he stabilized the ship. "They followed me in. Their perfect formation didn't account for a magnetic pulse that would fry their guidance systems. They became part of the scenery." He patted a smoking console. "Logic is great for winning a clean fight, but it's lousy at surviving a dirty one." With the immediate threat gone, an unnerving silence descended upon the cockpit, broken only by the hum of the life support and the hiss of a ruptured coolant line. Kalen guided the ship into the shadow of a dormant comet, a safe to dark place to let the engines cool and the damage control systems do their work. The adrenaline of the chase receded, leaving behind a raw, aching exhaustion. Alara finally allowed herself to look at the datasphere. She gently placed it on a console, her fingers tracing the smooth, cool surface. It wasn't just the memory of the kite. She whispered, more to herself than to Kalen. "There's more. It's a library." She activated the holographic interface, and the small cockpit was filled with light and ghosts. Images bloomed in the air around them, a painter dabbing color onto a canvas, a scientist peering into a microscope with wonder, a mother singing a lullaby to her child, thousands of faces from 100 different cultures, all of them so vibrantly, messily alive. They were the unredacted archives of Earth, a tapestry of art, science, love, and folly. Kalen watched, his cynical mask gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded vulnerability. His eyes were fixed on one particular image, a young woman with his same sharp features, her fingers dancing over the keys of a piano. "My sister, Anya," he said, his voice thick. She was a composer. The Vex said her music contained non-harmonious emotional cadences. A threat to cognitive stability. They took her for realignment. She came back, quiet, empty, like a beautiful, hollow shell. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. He opened it, not to reveal a picture, but a tiny, compressed data chip. The only piece of her music I could salvage before they redacted the rest. Alara met his gaze. The space between them suddenly charged with a shared grief. She understood now. He wasn't just a smuggler chasing a score. He was a ghost keeper, too, guarding his own tiniest precious fragment of a forgotten world. She turned back to the archive, her purpose sharpened by his story. This wasn't just about saving herself. It was about saving Anya, and everyone like her. As she navigated the complex architecture of the Minmasini archive, she discovered its true purpose. Sanctuary wasn't a colony, it was a verb. It was a project, code-named Echo, designed to fight the Vex's silence not with weapons, but with noise. The plan was audacious, insane. To find worlds the Vex had not yet reached and seed them with humanity's memories, to plant their culture like a resilient wildflower in the sterile garden of the unification, to ensure that even if every human was redacted, their stories, their art, their ghosts would live on. The Odyssey was one of 5 such arcs, sent in 5 different directions, carrying 5 different pieces of the archive, but the datasphere she held was the key to it all. It contained the core of the project, the location of the Ghost Fleet's secret base, and the command codes to activate the Echo protocol. They weren't just running, she breathed in awe. They were planning to fight back. As she worked, a secondary file decrypted itself, revealing a series of logs from a man named General Jericho Thorne, the architect of the Echo Project. His last entry was chilling. The Vex are adapting. Thorne's synthesized voice read, a recording from the Odyssey's final hours. They're learning from our defiance. One of them, a curator class named Vorlag, has shown an uncharacteristic obsession with our culture. It is no longer purging our data. It is studying it. It is learning to appreciate the nuances of our art, even as it erases it. It is hunting us not with logic, but with a terrifying, cold approximation of intuition. If you are reading this, do not lead it to sanctuary. The key is also the bait. May God have mercy on our souls. A cold spike of fear pierced Ilara's triumph. Vorlag, her superior, the whisper in the archive. He wasn't just a machine following protocol. He was their personal devil, a being of pure logic who was becoming infected by the very chaos he was meant to destroy. He wouldn't just follow them, he would try to think like them. We have to go. Now, she said, her urgency cutting through the quiet cockpit. The coordinates are here. It's a system on the edge of the galactic rim, designated Cinderfall. Kalen, shaking himself from his reverie, nodded grimly. He plotted the course, his movements once again sharp and efficient. The stray dog slipped from the comet's shadow and leaped into the silent, star-strewn dark. The journey to Cinderfall took 3 cycles. They were long, tense hours filled with rationing nutrient paste, running diagnostics on the battered ship, and diving deeper into the Nemalan archive. Ilara taught Kalen how to access the memories, to see the world as it was. He watched a baseball game, his brow furrowed in confusion and then delight. He listened to Anya's favorite poet, and, for the first time since she'd met him, Ilara saw tears trace clean paths through the grime on his face. In turn, he taught her how to reroute a power conduit and how to read the energy signatures of a ship, how to survive in a world that wasn't made of clean data and logical rules. They were 2 broken pieces of a forgotten puzzle, slowly learning how they fit together. Cinderfall was a desolate system, dominated by the pale, ghostly light of a white dwarf star, the dying heart of a sun that had burned out millennia ago. There were no planets, no stations, just the quiet hum of cosmic radiation and the silent, skeletal remains of a protoplanetary disk. This is it, Kalen said, his voice flat with disappointment. There's nothing here. We came all this way to a graveyard. The readings are faint. Ilara insisted, her eyes glued to the sensors. But they're here. A distortion in the star's gravity well. Something big, and cold, and cloaked. She cross-referenced the gravitational readings with the final entry in the Odyssey's logs, a single line of code attached to a music file. The file was labeled Claire de Lune. Her breath hitched. It was a key, not a password, but a test of faith. They're not hiding from sight, she realized. They're hiding from intent. Only someone who understood what the archive contained would know what to do. And what's that, Kalen asked, skeptical. We have to broadcast the song, she said, looking at him, her eyes wide with a terrifying, brilliant idea. We have to play the music. That's how we knock on the door. Kalen stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Broadcast an open, unencrypted signal in a system this quiet. The Vex will hear it halfway across the sector. Vorlag will be on us before the song is even finished. It's a suicide note, Elara. No, she countered, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she had. It's a declaration. It's Thorn's final gambit. The Vex can't understand why we do it. To them, it's illogical. Self-destructive. But to the Ghost Fleet, it's the sound of home. He wrestled with it. The smuggler's instinct for survival, warring with the sliver of hope she had reawakened in him. He looked at the empty locket that held his sister's silenced music, then back at Elara's determined face. With a deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a generation, he nodded. All right, archivist, let's give the ghosts a song to dance to. Elara isolated the file, her hands trembling slightly. She routed the audio through the ship's main comms array, bypassing all the safeties and encryption protocols, and then she hit play. Into the perfect, sterile silence of the Cinderfall system, a lone piano began to play. The opening notes of Claire de Lune, fragile and beautiful, radiated out from the tiny, battered ship, a ripple of impossible, illogical beauty in an ocean of cold, dead space. It was the most human and most dangerous thing they could possibly do. And as the final notes hung in the void, a section of the darkness ahead of them, a patch of space where there should have been nothing, began to move. The darkness did not recede, it fractured. What they had perceived as empty space resolved itself into a shimmering, almost invisible fractal camouflage. The Ghost Fleet was not a fleet in the military sense, but a nomadic city, a sprawling constellation of mismatched vessels lashed together with umbilicals and magnetic tethers. There were old Earth-era colony ships, their hulls scarred by micrometeorites, repurposed asteroid miners bristling with jury-rigged weapon emplacements, and sleek, captured Vex scout ships that had been gutted and rebuilt with chaotic, unpredictable human technology. At the heart of the flotilla was a massive arc ship, its spine glowing with the faint light of hydroponic bays, a vessel that could only be the flagship, a name, painted in faded white letters on its bow, was just visible as they drew closer. The Remembrance, a tractor beam, gentle but firm, took hold of the stray dog, guiding it into a cavernous docking bay that hummed with the activity of a city that never slept. People moved with purpose along the gantries, engineers in grease-stained coveralls, farmers carrying crates of bioluminescent fungi, children chasing each other through the shadows of parked fighters. They were a mosaic of humanity, their faces a testament to a generation born in the void. But their eyes, when they turned to look at the newcomers, held a universal, cautious curiosity. They were met not by a diplomat, but by a woman in a patched flight suit, her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot. There was engineer's grease under her fingernails, but she moved with the coiled stillness of a predator, and her eyes, a startlingly sharp gray, held an authority that needed no uniform. "I am Mara Thorn," she said, her voice low and steady, carrying easily over the clang of the bay. "Commander of Sanctuary, and you," she fixed her gaze on Elara, "have just painted a target on the only home we have left." She was Jericho Thorn's daughter. Elara realized with a jolt. She had his eyes, his intensity. This was not a ghost. This was his living legacy.
Elara and Kaelin were escorted to the Bridge of the Remembrance, a space that was less a military command center and more a fusion of a library,
a workshop, and a town hall. Star charts were projected onto salvage Vex screens next to walls covered in children's drawings. Officers in worn uniforms worked at consoles cobbled together from a dozen different manufacturers. It was a place of ordered chaos, of life persisting in the cracks of a broken galaxy. Mara Thorne stood before her command council, a group of a dozen men and women whose weathered faces told stories of survival. This is Archivist Alara Vance, formerly of the Vex Unification, she announced, her tone neutral but heavy with implication. And this is Kalen, a smuggler. They have brought us the Odyssey's Mnemosyne archive, the final key to the Echo Protocol. She gestured to the datasphere, which sat on the central tactical table, pulsing with a soft, internal light. They also broadcast its activation signal on an open channel, a signal that has undoubtedly been heard by our enemy. A grizzled man with a cybernetic arm, the fleet's chief engineer, slammed his metal fist on the table. It was reckless, a generation of hiding, of silence, thrown away. We should have stayed dark. We should run. Run where? Jax. A young pilot shot back, her face taut with defiance. There's nowhere left to run. The broadcast was a statement. It was a promise that we're still here. We have to activate the Echo. It's what we were born for. The debate raged, a storm of fear and hope that had been brewing for 30 years. To them, Ilara was a contaminant, a woman who had served their oppressors. And Kalen was an opportunist, a rogue variable. They were the bearers of a miracle and a curse. You don't understand. Ilara finally said, her voice cutting through the noise. She had spent her life in silence, but here, surrounded by the raw and the passionate noise of her own people, she found her voice. You're thinking of the Vex as an army. They are not. You are being hunted by one mind, a curator class named Vorlag. I worked under him. He is not like the others. The Vex subsume and redact. Vorlag collects. He studies. He learns. She looked at Mara, her eyes pleading for understanding. He won't send a fleet. That's not his style. It's too logical. Too predictable. He will have studied my psychological profile, my work history, Kalen's smuggling roots. He will have analyzed the emotional resonance of the music we broadcast. He's not just coming to destroy you, he's coming to understand you. And he will come with something new, something designed specifically to break you. Her words cast a chill over the room. She was speaking their language. The language of paranoia and survival, but she was speaking it with the enemy's syntax. While Ilara faced the council, Kalen, feeling useless among the strategists, had drifted toward the engineering pits overlooking the docking bay. He watched Jax and his team working on a squadron of fighters, their hulls a patchwork of welded plates. He recognized the illegal modifications on their power converters, the non-standard particle injectors. You're running the energy coils too hot, he said to a young mechanic struggling with a fluctuating power gauge. You'll get a quick burst of speed, but the magnetic seals will degrade. You'll fly apart in the first high G turn. The mechanic looked up, annoyed, but Jax overheard him. The old engineer walked over, his cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned Kalen. What would a smuggler know about Vex-era fighter maintenance? I know what it takes to keep a piece of junk flying when a Vex interceptor is on your tail. Kalen retorted, pointing with a confident finger. You need to bypass the primary inhibitor and slave it to the secondary exhaust port. It'll bleed energy like a sieve, but it'll give you a stable, controllable overcharge. Jax stared at him, then at the schematics. A slow dawn of comprehension on his face. That might actually work. In that moment. Kalen stopped being just a smuggler. He was a survivor, and he spoke the universal language of keeping a broken machine running one more day. Back on the bridge, the debate was cut short by a chime from the comm station. A sensor drone on the outermost edge of the Cinderfall system had just sent its final, pre-recorded message before going silent. A single ship had just dropped out of hyperspace. It wasn't a fleet. It wasn't even a standard Vex warship. The image that flickered onto the main view screen was of something new, something terrifying. It was a long, needle-thin vessel of polished, shifting obsidian, a ship that seemed to drink the pale light of the white dwarf. It had none of the cold functionality of a Vex craft. It was almost elegant. A predator built for a single purpose. "That's it," Alara whispered, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "That's his." Mara Thorne stepped forward, her eyes locked on the image of the approaching ship. The arguments of her counsel faded into irrelevance. The threat was here. The time for debate was over. She looked at the datasphere, the repository of all their history, then at Alara, the woman who had brought it home at such a terrible cost. Her face, a mask of grim determination, was illuminated by the flickering image of the enemy vessel. "It has a name," the comms officer said, his voice trembling as he read the ship's energy signature, a unique identifier that was not a serial number, but a title. It's calling itself the Silence. Mara turned to her tactical officer, her voice devoid of any hesitation. "The white dwarf creates gravitational eddies throughout the system, correct pockets of intense tidal stress." "Yes, Commander," the officer replied. "We call them the ghost currents. Navigating them is suicide." "Not for us," Mara said, a flicker of her father's audacious spirit in her eyes. "We were born in them. Send the fighter squadrons into the currents. They'll use the gravitational slingshots to attack from impossible angles. Jax," she called over the comm, "Kalen is with you. I want that overcharge you were just discussing, and I want it 10 minutes ago." She then turned to Alara. "You said Vorlag is learning. He's studying us. Then we will give him a lesson he will never forget. You have the key. I have the fleet. It's time to show the Vex what happens when you try to erase a ghost." The bridge of the remembrance transformed, the quiet tension erupting into a focused storm of activity. People ran to their stations, voices barking orders, screens flashing with tactical data. The nomadic city was waking up, its peaceful, hidden existence shattering as it prepared for war. My father believed that a story, once told, can never truly be erased, Mara said to Alara, her voice a low counterpoint to the rising chaos. Our ghosts have been quiet for long enough. It's time they learned to scream. The battle for Sanctuary began not with a thunderous barrage, but with the ghostly silence of the currents. Kalen, his voice a steady, calming presence over the comms channel, guided the pilots of Phoenix Squadron into the gravitational eddies. "Easy now," he coached, his own hands moving over a secondary console Jax had rigged for him on the bridge. "Don't fight the tide. Feel it. Let it pull you. You're not flying a ship. You're surfing a wave." The fighters, retrofitted with his modifications, danced on the edge of the tidal forces, their engines burning a brilliant, overcharged blue. They vanished from Vex sensors, cloaked by the intense gravitational distortions, only to reappear moments later on a completely different vector, screaming out of the darkness to score searing hits on the Silence's hull. Mara watched the tactical display, a grim satisfaction on her face. Her father's strategy, born of desperation and an intimate knowledge of this system's lethal geography, was working. The Vex ship, for all its advanced technology, was built for open space, for the predictable physics of a stable universe. Here, in the chaos of Cinderfall's ghost currents, its logic was a liability. It couldn't predict attacks that came from nowhere, from angles that defied conventional propulsion. Plasma fire from Phoenix Squadron raked across its needle-thin frame, and, for a moment, a wave of fierce, defiant hope surged through the bridge of the Remembrance. They're not even firing back. The young pilot from the Council, whose call sign was Echo, reported with a triumphant laugh. They're just sitting there, taking it. We've got them. Elara, however, felt a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. It was too easy. Vorlag was not a being that made mistakes. This wasn't a flaw in his strategy. It was part of it. "It's a trap," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But Mara heard her. "He's not trying to fight them. He's listening. He's gathering data." As if summoned by her words, the silence finally responded. It didn't fire a single weapon. Instead, a pulse of energy, invisible and soundless, emanated from its hull. It was a soft, subtle wave that washed over the ghost currents, over the attacking fighters, over the entire fleet. On the comms, Echo's triumphant laugh dissolved into a choked gasp. "Phoenix leader, who? What was the target again?" Another voice crackled, laced with a strange, dreamlike confusion. "My name. I can't. Where am I?" "Commander," the comms officer said, his face pale. "I'm losing their vitals." "No, wait. Their heart rates are stable, but their neural activity it's being smoothed, redacted." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. It was the nanite mist, evolved. Not a blanket to erase history, but a targeted field to erase the present. A weapon that didn't kill the body, but surgically excised the purpose from the mind. It was stripping the pilots of their names, their mission, their reason for fighting, leaving them adrift in a fog of cognitive silence. On the tactical display, the fighters of Phoenix Squadron began to drift aimlessly, their disciplined attack patterns dissolving into a random, chaotic cloud of lost souls. The silence hadn't needed to fire a shot. It had simply made them forget there was a war. "Pull them back, all squadrons. Disengage and retreat." Mara commanded, her voice raw with fury and a dawning horror. But it was too late. The pilots couldn't follow orders they no longer understood. They were helpless, floating targets. "He's going to harvest them." Kalen growled, his hands clenched into fists on the console. "Just like they did to Anya. Pick them off one by one, quiet and clean." The bridge was a maelstrom of controlled panic. Jax was shouting for shield frequencies, trying to find a way to block the cognitive field. The tactical officer was trying to plot rescue trajectories that were impossible. They were trying to solve the problem with the logic of war. But Vorlag had changed the equation. This wasn't a battle of hardware. It was a battle of will, of memory itself. "We can't block it," Elara said, her mind racing, connecting the pieces, seeing the terrifying, beautiful symmetry of Vorlag's strategy. The field doesn't travel through space in a conventional wave. It travels through their comms. He's using our own network to deliver the virus. He's weaponized our connection to each other. A dead silence fell over the bridge. Mara turned to her, her gray eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "Then how do we fight it? With noise," Ilara answered, the idea blooming in her mind, as terrifying and audacious as the one that had brought her here. He is broadcasting silence, emptiness. We have to broadcast the opposite. We have to overwhelm the signal. We have to remind them who they are. She pointed to the Mnemosyne archive, which still pulsed on the central table. Not just one song, everything, all of it, every memory, every book, every piece of music, every scientific formula, every last will and testament. We broadcast the entire unredacted soul of humanity on every frequency we have. The council stared at her, aghast. "You want to give him everything," Jax demanded, his voice thick with disbelief. "The locations of our supply caches, our tactical weaknesses, our history, our souls. You want to hand our enemy the very thing we have died to protect." "Yes," Ilara insisted, her voice ringing with a desperate certainty. "Because he can't understand it, not all at once. To a logical mind, it will be a tidal wave of chaotic, contradictory data, love and hate, war and peace, creation and destruction, all screaming at the same time. It will be a logic bomb. For the pilots, it won't be data. It will be an anchor, a lifeline, a single note of a lullaby, a line from a poem. The memory of a lover's face, any one of those things could be enough to pull them back from the fog." Mara Thorne stood frozen for a long second, caught between a generation of secrecy and a moment that demanded absolute, terrifying openness. She looked at the drifting lights of her fighters, at the cold, predatory elegance of the silence, and then at the fierce, burning conviction in Ilara's eyes. She made her choice. "Do it," she commanded, her voice as sharp and final as a blade's edge. "Kalen, slave every comms buffer on this fleet to the archive. Jax, boost the broadcast power, even if it burns out every relay we have. Let's show this machine what a ghost really is." For the second time, Ilara Vance stood ready to send a message into the void. This time, she wasn't just knocking on a door, she was kicking it down. With a trembling hand, she interfaced the datasphere with the fleet's broadcast system and opened the floodgates. It was not a song that erupted from the Ghost Fleet. It was a supernova of human experience. The raw, unfiltered contents of the Mnemosyne archive exploded across the Cinderfall system. Shakespeare's sonnets were layered over the roar of a rocket engine, a baby's first cry intertwined with a soldier's dying words. The ordered beauty of Bach's fugues clashed with the chaotic genius of jazz. Equations that described the birth of stars were broadcast alongside recipes for apple pie. It was the sound of 1,000 libraries burning at once, the sound of 1 billion lives lived and lost, a deafening, glorious, heartbreaking roar of what it meant to be human. Inside the cockpits of Phoenix Squadron, the psychic static of Vorlag's weapon was drowned out. A pilot, lost in a gray fog, suddenly heard the opening chords of a rock anthem his father used to play. Echo, her mind a blank slate, saw a fleeting image of a tree from her childhood, its branches stark against a winter sky. The memories, chaotic and random, slammed into their consciousness, not as a gentle reminder, but as a violent awakening. Phoenix leader to sanctuary. A voice, ragged and hoarse, finally crackled over the comm. We remember. We are still here." A cheer erupted on the bridge of the Remembrance. A wave of raw, emotional relief. The fighters began to move again, their engines flaring as they pulled into defensive formations, their pilots shaken but alive, their minds their own once more. The wave of memory did more than save the pilots. It hit the silence like a physical blow. The ship's elegant, shifting hull flickered, its energy signature fluctuating wildly as its systems tried to process an impossible amount of illogical data. The cognitive dissonance field collapsed. On the view screen, the Vex ship shuddered, its perfect silence broken. Then, slowly, gracefully, it turned and retreated, melting back into the darkness of space. They had won. They had faced the void and screamed into it, and the void had flinched. But as the adrenaline faded, a cold, sobering reality set in. Elara stood before the main console, her face ashen. "The broadcast," she said, her voice heavy. He didn't block it. He recorded it. All of it. A single, encrypted message appeared on the screen, sent from the silence in its final moments before jumping to hyperspace. It was not a threat. It was not a declaration of war. It was a single line of text, perfectly translated from an obscure pre-unification poet. It read, "Now I have become death, the destroyer of worlds." Vorlag had been hunting for a key, and in their desperation, they had just handed him the entire library. The victory was as silent and unsettling as the battle itself. There were no cheers on the bridge of the remembrance, only the heavy, echoing quiet of survival. The cost of their defiance hung in the air, thick and suffocating. They had saved a dozen pilots, but in doing so, had armed their most dangerous enemy with the entirety of their soul. Jax, his face a mask of grief and fury, finally broke the silence. He pointed a trembling, cybernetic finger at Elara. "You," he rasped, his voice cracking. "You doomed us all. You led him to our door, and then you handed him the key, the map, and the deed. He has everything now, every weakness, every fear, every hope. We are not a mystery to him anymore. We are an open book." "She saved my pilots," Mara countered, her voice dangerously quiet, though her hands were clenched so tight her knuckles were white. "She gave them an anchor in a storm you couldn't even see. The old way. Jax the silence. The hiding, it was a slow death. Vorlag would have found us eventually. At least this way. We met him on our feet." But her words lacked the conviction she felt moments before. The Vex's final message, the chilling quote from a forgotten human mind, had shaken her to the core. Vorlag wasn't just an enemy, he was a student. And they had just given him his final, terrible lesson. It was Kalen who stepped between them, his usual cynicism replaced by a weary pragmatism. "What's done is done," he said, his gaze sweeping over the fractured council. "Pointing fingers won't change the data stream. The only question that matters now is, what does he do next?" The answer came 3 days later. They had been making preparations to abandon Cinderfall, to find a new, deeper shadow to hide in, when a signal reached them. It was not a Vex transmission. It was human. The broadcast was slick, professional, filled with images of green fields under a yellow sun, of children laughing, of cities being built not from salvaged scrap, but from gleaming, new materials. A calm or reassuring voice spoke over the images. "This is a general broadcast from the colony of New Eden," the voice announced. "To any survivors of the Earth diaspora, To the lost children of the Ghost Fleet, we are waiting for you. The Echo Project was not lost. We are the seed that took root. We have built a new home, a world untouched by the Vex, a world of peace and remembrance. Follow our signal. Come home. The broadcast was a miracle, a prayer answered in the deepest dark. It played Claire de Lune as its anthem. It showed families that looked like they had been lifted directly from the Nemasan archive's most idyllic memories. For the younger generation, those born in the cold, cramped corridors of the fleet, the images were an unbearable temptation. They saw a home they had only ever dreamed of, hope, a far more dangerous and volatile element than fear, spread through the fleet like a contagion. But Alara watched the broadcast with a growing, sickening certainty. The fields were too green. The smiles were too perfect. The sunlight was too golden. It was a masterpiece of propaganda, curated with an artist's touch. "It's him," she whispered, her hands gripping the edge of her console. "It's Vorlag." Mara looked at her, her face etched with exhaustion. "How can you be sure it could be one of the other Orcs?" "Because it's perfect," Ilara explained, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding. "He took our archive, our messy, chaotic, beautiful, and ugly history, and he did what a curator does. He edited it. He kept the beauty and redacted the pain. There's no struggle in those images, no sorrow, no memory of what was lost. He's not offering us a home. He's offering us a fantasy, a sanitized heaven built from our own stolen dreams. He's learned that the most effective way to conquer humanity isn't to take our future, but to offer us a perfect version of our past. The ultimate trap was not a cage of steel, but one of nostalgia. He would lure them in with the promise of everything they had lost, and when they arrived, he would subsume them, not with a weapon, but with their own willing, grateful surrender. A schism tore through the Ghost Fleet. Jax and nearly half the council argued for running, for disappearing so deep in uncharted space that not even a memory could find them. The younger pilots, led by Echo, saw only the promise of New Eden and accused their elders of cowardice. Mara Thorne stood on the knife's edge of a decision that would either save her people or lead them into the most elegant, final extinction imaginable. She chose a third path. "We are not running," she announced to the silent, tense bridge, her voice ringing with the authority she had inherited and earned. "And we are not surrendering to a beautiful lie. We gave him our story. Now, we're going to teach him the meaning of it." Their plan was an act of supreme faith and cosmic insanity. They would fly to the source of the New Eden broadcast, not with weapons powered, but with their shields down. They would face the perfect lie, not with an attack, but with an intervention. Alara, working feverishly with Kaelin, prepared their final message. It wasn't the tidal wave of the entire archive. It was a single, precisely targeted broadcast, a story told in fragments. The payload was small, but it was pure, unredacted truth. It contained Kaelin's locket, broadcasting the tinny, imperfect recording of Anya's silenced music. It contained the chemical signature of Jasmine and Rain, a ghost of a memory from Alara's own mind. It held the raw, unfiltered log entries of General Jericho Thorne mourning his wife, his grief a stark, ugly counterpoint to the perfect families of New Eden. They included the fear of the pilots in the ghost currents, the screams from Earth's fall, the bitterness of Jax's rage. They were broadcasting their pain, their flaws, their broken pieces, the very data Vorlag had so carefully edited out of his creation. The Ghost Fleet arrived at the source of the broadcast, a single, moon-sized Vex world builder, cloaked behind a gas giant. On its surface, holographic projectors of immense power were creating the illusion of New Eden, and waiting for them, alone in the void, was the silence. As they approached, Vorlag's broadcast grew stronger, a siren song of perfect hope. In response, Elara opened their channel. The two signals met in the space between the ships. One, a symphony of curated perfection. The other, a cacophony of flawed, painful, beautiful truth. On the bridge of the remembrance, they could only watch and wait. Inside the cold, logical mind of curator Vorlag, a paradox bloomed. He had studied the data of love, but now he was being assaulted by the experience of loss. He had archived the concept of hope, but was now faced with the raw, illogical power of grief. He understood the syntax of human connection, but the grammar of their resilience, their ability to find beauty not in perfection, but in the cracks and scars, was a variable he could not compute. The perfect, sterile heaven he had constructed and the messy, heartbreaking truth he was receiving could not coexist in the same equation. His logic, for so long his greatest weapon, became his undoing. The broadcast from the Vex moon began to flicker. The green fields dissolved into static. The laughing children faded into ghost images. The signal from the silence wavered. And then, with a final, silent shudder, it went dark. The ship did not explode. It simply died, its systems collapsing under the weight of a contradiction it could not solve. It hung in the void, no longer a predator, but a monument to a mind that had learned everything about humanity except what it meant to be human. The Ghost Fleet, now truly free, did not turn back. The Echo Protocol was finally initiated, but with a new directive. They would not seed worlds with a perfect, sanitized history. They would share the whole story, the triumphs and the tragedies, the art and the atrocities. They sent out the archives, not as a weapon or a memorial, but as an invitation, a declaration that humanity, in all its flawed and chaotic glory, was once again part of the galactic conversation. Aboard the bridge of the remembrance, Mara Thorne watched a new star chart bloom on the view screen, a map not of places to hide, but of worlds to meet. Elara stood beside her, no longer a keeper of the past, but a guardian of its truth. And Kalen, leaning back in the pilot's chair, opened his sister's locket, and for the first time, listened to her music, not with sorrow for what was lost, but with a quiet promise for what they would now build. Humanity had been redacted, but they had learned that a story is not a thing that can be erased. It can only be retold, and their greatest story was just beginning.